Oh, I forgot to clap last time.
Clap.
All right. Yeah, thanks for tuning back in here at North Star Pro Realty. We got Eric, Tom, and Tyler. Today we're going to be talking about some automated valuation things, the familiar Zestimate from Zillow. We run a couple other reports and why they're important to you, whether they matter or not. So the four main ones that I'd like to talk about are Zillow, the AVM report, which is through CoreLogic, through our MLS system, and the Realtor Property Resource, which pulls more information, the RPR report. Those are the three major ones that I use, and I also include the local county assessors, valuation when I'm sending out, custom, custom to your address reports on a quarterly basis. So
Which we know are not automated. Thank you for your work, county.
except you, Mike.
Well, Mike.
Mike's my best friend. So, yeah, not going to chime in there, guys. So, anyway, love you, Mike. Anyway, so those four that I use, I'm going to give you a big 30,000-foot view. I went through my entire database, which past clients, neighborhoods that I like to work in, and I've got about 1,200 people in that list. And I send out between every 60 and 90 days a postcard. I follow it. Here's your valuation. And what I'm seeing over the last 90 to 120 days is actually those valuations, on average, are reducing their perceived valuation of 0.7% over the last 90 to 120 days.
Sure.
Now, the biggest increase I saw was 2.5%, and then the biggest decrease I saw, it was like 4.5%, but there was some stipulations on. There was just not great information. It's one of those, fringe properties. Is on a bunch of acreage, so those are huge variables.
So the 2.5%. What type of property was that?
That was your I think it was like 2-story in Buffalo. It was like a 5-bed, 4-bath.
Okay.
It was a really nice home.
Which is actually not what I would expect to have had an automated valuation go up.
Correct. I was a little bit surprised on that.
Sure.
So it hadn't been sold before. So that's one that has not already been sold.
So maybe that was something, and I have no idea, but maybe they got your last postcard, went into Zillow and said, let's check on this for ourselves. And then when they went into Zillow, they said, oh, it says we have 3 bedrooms, but we finished our basement. They put 2 more bedrooms in, and then all of a sudden their valuation went up a little bit. So I have no idea. I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah, I don't record that much information on the back end. It's enough to pull each of those valuations each and every time.
So how accurate would you say, these automated valuations are? Because you definitely see some, and we've all seen it, where you go in and you're just like, that's not even in the ballpark, of kind of where this is. But then there's plenty that are like, oh yeah, I mean it's close for sure.
Yeah. If I had to rank them, I would say the least consistent or the least accurate is the assessors, is the assessor's office. And I'm going to give you why. Is because state statute says they have to be within 90 to 105% of like a true market value. Now, there was 2 years ago, where they seemed to go gangbusters and everything was at 105%. Now they're backing off a little bit, even though values actually didn't go down. But because they have such a wide spread of information that they can use, and they're doing it based on the tax basis, so they typically are the least accurate, mostly on the lower level. I guess a lower price, I should say.
Well, and it's typically a year or two behind as well, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. Because they only do it once, once a year. I think that's what their requirement is. Mm-hmm. They actually have to, go in a property, review the property each and every single year. So you only get one of those. That's not updated constantly.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Because in it, were you going to rank the rest of yours?
Yeah, eventually.
Okay, go for it.
We'll get back to you. Hang on a second.
I'll get to my point later.
Yeah. I would then go to Zillow, so that's third. And then the AVM report would be second. And I think the most accurate, most consistently, is a Realtor Property Resource report. That's what I've seen probably the most accurate of like a true market value.
Sure.
It does have a little bit more capability of pulling more information that's not consumer driven. I should say it's actually supposed to be accurate, pulling from the MLS. So it's more accurate information versus where Zillow, obviously we use them, everybody looks at them, is some of that information is really good, some of it's really bad. Mm-hmm. And actually consumers can go in and change their own information. So it's pulling good information, some bad information.
Yeah. So, I mean, we should probably say that these automated valuations are pulling information of like properties that have sold, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of how it's guessing what the value of your property is.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you get a townhouse, for example, that has 30 other ones, all around it, and they're all very, very similar. That one's probably going to be a little bit more accurate than if you've got, 10 acres with a pole barn that hasn't sold in 20 years.
Yep.
And so one of the reasons that like we use Zillow is actually just to acknowledge to a consumer that we have seen that number. Like I went on a listing appointment a few days ago, and 4-bed, 2-bath house, split entry. And I went through my whole thing. I came up with a price myself. I said, yep, I think this is probably about $335,000. And I pulled up Zillow just to see, okay, what number is this? So that if they feel differently, I can say, yeah, you know what, I have seen that. And I pulled it up. It was like 334,700. I was like, oh, wow, okay.
Eric is kind of like a computer, though. He's a robot.
Either that or they're
No,
thinking
I
that he
was-
just didn't work very hard to come up with his number.
I was giving credit to Zillow to say that they were very
Yes.
close. So
So to your point, there is where Zillow really accelerates or excels. Accelerates. Gosh, I'm
really
not a
go fast.
wordsmith. Not a wordsmith today. Is where they excel.
Yep.
There it is.
It's terrible. Is those 3-bed, 2-bath splits where there's a ton of them.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the most active part, is because they can pull in a lot more information more recently. But I would still contend that there's still some variables of this house was in much nicer condition, and the computer can't smell a house. It can't really look at a photo and say that actually was great, or the view out the back, where a person might be able to say, hey, I'd pay $10,000 more because I didn't have to look at all the crap cars in the neighbor that 2 blocks away did.
Yep.
So, so I guess if you can come up with like a percentage basis of like, if you feel like it's accurate, I mean, is it 3% either way, 5% either way,
Well, and maybe this is one where I don't name which one of them it is. I believe that they have a disclaimer that says that they are within 10% of a market price 60% of the time.
That sounds like some Brian Fantana stuff
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, so you're telling me 40% of the time you're more than 10% off? And that's like almost 50% of the time. So you got a $400,000 house. You're telling us that 40% of the time you're off by more than $40,000.
Yeah.
40% of the time.
40% of the
Every
time.
time.
It works
So-
every time.
It's one of those that you can look at and go, if that's their disclaimer based off past information, it's exactly what you said. You go into a town of Buffalo, Minnesota, like where we are, and you get a bunch of the split entries. You can get the 2 stories, the ramblers, where they're on a city lot. Those are usually pretty accurate. But we also have a lot of lakes in the area. We have a lot of farms and everything. You get a house that's on 10 acres, and that's a completely different result that
Yeah.
a lot of times we look at those numbers and go, that's not even close. And it's sometimes in both directions. Sometimes we think they're 500,000 too high and 500,000 too low, depending on, well, did they notice that there was a barn in there? A $250,000 or $400,000 barn that's fully insulated, fully heated, a 40 by 60 shed. Like there's stuff like that just doesn't really get noticed to the same extent.
Absolutely. I'm going to invite anybody that's still listening to this clip is go ahead and click the link or get in contact with us, send us a message. If you want to get your quarterly update, you're happy to send it to you. It's non-obligatory. Man, I need some coffee or something, or less coffee. It doesn't obligate you to work with us. It's just, hey, I always think information's never a bad thing. Knowing where you're at in the market, and we can email it to you, we can send it to you. The only thing we need is your address, really. Or address email would be great.
And what would also maybe be interesting if you want to go and pull up your address on Zillow, take a screenshot of what the price is, and then just tell us if you think it's close or not. That might be interesting to see too.
Let's see. I'm going to do mine here. You guys are familiar with my house.
Fairly.
I did some automated valuations for, people who I was just kind of letting them know what the value of their house was, if I was going to go out there or whatever. And I'm still getting emails from when I was just testing it out of their homes. And it's just so interesting, like I did one like 3 years ago, and I'm just watching it increase over, the last 3 years. And it's just kind of fun to know, you
Yeah.
know.
Do you have your phone on you, Tom?
I do.
Why don't you check yours out? I just checked mine out. I feel mine's pretty accurate. I mean, it's probably what it would be listed at. A little less than the assessor's office. But
So mine's
you
going to
check
be
yours out?
I did, but I just bought 9 months ago, so it just
Oh.
went up about 2% from there.
Sure. Again, prime example. I think we've already mentioned this on one of these episodes. Is yours was in much worse condition than most homes on the market.
Yes.
It couldn't smell your house before you bought it.
You didn't want to. Neither did the computer.
That's right.
So mine's going to be a good example of, yeah. So, oh man, mine
What, you bought
actually went up.
2022?
2022, 2 years. So mine, since I purchased, this says that it went up $26,000, $27,000
In almost 3 years.
in almost 3 years. Now, this also doesn't take into
8%?
consideration that I finished my basement, I fixed up the shed, all new flooring throughout the entire house. I got new siding throughout, on the house. So it's like you said, Zillow doesn't know that that was done,
Right.
which makes me feel like hopefully it's more than where it's at.
Yeah.
Doesn't take into account the 2 friendly cats that stay with the property.
One is
I'm so sorry, Kelly.
2 months ago. One is gone.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, that's okay.
Prime example. I mean, we do pull all these information. Like whenever I go on an appointment, I bring these with because most people are familiar with their own. I remember going into one because these algorithms can't see anything, and obviously we don't know what's in homes until we go in there.
Yep.
Is I walked in and I go, wow. I'm going to tell you right now, every piece of information that I brought to you today is wrong. It's as if it was in a completely different neighborhood. And she goes, oh, yeah, the house burned down 2 years ago, and we redid everything. I said, well, you did a fantastic job. And there's I didn't see any history on that, online at all. And it was completely redone. Almost out of the ordinary. Totally redone. But it was one of the coolest houses I've ever been in.
Yep.
So
That'll do it.
I think that'll do it. Thank you. Click the link, and we'd be glad to send you your market report.